Hi, I'm Alex,
Hi, I'm Liz.
Hi, I'm Annie.
and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people for the people.
Perfect synergy.
Cool. So today we have quite a doozy of a paper, I think. We will be talking all things COVID again. But this one, I think, very different than the last one that we're talking about. We're talking about more like vaccination sort of stuff. This is all about the kind of misperceptions that we have as society, I think, and not just like certain individuals, but like kind of all of us. We have these misperceptions about how coronavirus spreads. So, this paper that was titled Correcting Misperceptions of Exponential Coronavirus Growth Increases Support for Social Distancing. This is by Lammers and colleagues. Just last year, this was published. And so, yeah, as I was saying, we have these misperceptions of how coronavirus is spread, and I guess spoiler alert, we often underestimate how much is being spread, at least in the long run. But I think there's like an upshot here is that we can also correct for this. It seems like it is plausible. Like, yes, we might have these misperceptions, and we'll talk in a lot more detail about that. Soon enough, but we have these misperceptions. Oh, that's a horrible word. I should not keep saying that. That's so hard to keep saying. um, what's a better word, though? I don't know
There
for a
is
better
no
word.
other word, so just
Yeah,
use it.
I'll just keep fumbling on misperceptions. But
Misunderstand? Oh,
misunderstandings. Yes, we have misunderstandings of
that's
how
also difficult.
it's longer.
Scratch it, scratch it.
We have, but I think it rolls off the tongue a little bit better. So I'll say the misunderstandings of coronavirus spread, and we can correct for that, right? So it's not just that. If we correct for this, then we also end up engaging in more preventative. Oh, not necessarily engaging. We have at least more support for preventative behaviors, and that's a pretty big distinction that I'll also talk about in a little bit. Um, but that's the gist of it, I think, right? Like we
But
just want to. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, we forgot to mention like what this misperception is. So
Mm,
across three studies,
mm.
the papers shows that people believe that coronavirus will actually grow in a linear manner when it actually spreads in an exponential fashion. So
Right. Yeah. And that's great. It's a lot of words that might
yeah.
not make sense though.
We
But
should explain them to the public so they make sense.
right. Yes. So I guess at the point of this paper, it's not to like just point out like, hey, like you're dumb, because I don't think that's what the authors are trying to say here. That's not what we're trying to say either. I think the whole point of this was like we know that people are going to misunderstand these complicated like health issues, right? And we
Mhm.
just want to keep people safe, like, or at least that's what I think the author's intention with this was. That's at least my intention. Maybe I can't speak for Liz and Annie, but
Oh, of course, we're the bad guys.
um, but yeah, we just want to keep people safe, right? So how can we increase preventative behaviors such as social distancing?
Mhm.
This would be one route to do that. So if we don't want people to think that it's just a linear spread of this, what would that mean? That would mean like let's say every week tons of people are getting infected, right? But how fast are they getting infected? If it were a linear trend, that would mean that if 5 people were infected this week, maybe 10 people are infected. The 10 people will be infected by next week, and then 15, and then 20, and then 25, so on and so forth. But then that's not how it works. It goes a lot faster than that, actually. It starts out slow, but like after that, it kind of takes off. If we have, maybe I shouldn't do it in fives. I don't know that kind of
Math is really hard. I'm glad you're saying this and not me. Would not be good.
But let's say the rate actually doubles every week.
Mm. That's
So if
easier.
it's right, if it's 5, then it goes 10, 20, 40,
40.
80, 160, right? And that's a lot more than the 25, 30 that you might have thought, right? So that's the basic thing that these authors thought about, and that also makes sense, right? Like why is this exponential? Because I mean, everyone is interacting with a whole group of people, and that group of people, like some of them are going to get infected, some of them are not going to get infected, and then within each of those people, they also have groups, right? And so you can see like all these like pods of people that it's not just like one other person, it's not just two other people, it's like everyone knows other people, and that just continues to spread. um, so yeah, I mean that's the basic thing. But maybe I'll stop rambling so someone can say something better.
Yeah, maybe I can start with some strengths of this paper. So I think there are 3 major strengths of the paper. The first is that all of these experiments were conducted in March 2020. So that's very early. So that's about when, COVID started to become really a big issue in the US. So in that sense, the authors moved really fast and, administered their experience really quickly. So in that sense, they were able to get the message out to the public, very early on in the COVID pandemic. And the second point, second strength of this paper is that they did demonstrate, the exponential bias, which is part of a very, common statistical illiteracy that people engage in. And this has been shown in past work as well. People don't understand statistics very well, especially when it comes to like health issues. And this paper, emphasizes that and its implications for COVID preventive behaviors as well. And the third part of this, third strength of this paper is that they don't just end by saying people have this exponential, don't understand this exponential growth of the coronavirus. They actually try an intervention to correct for it, and also demonstrate that these misperceptions can be corrected, which does kind of gives a lesson for how public health communications can go about correcting the misperceptions. So, these are very important findings and the value of the paper. So, I'm not surprised that this paper has been published very quickly and also in a very prestigious journal. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. That they don't just leave it at, hey, this is a problem in society, but like, hey, this is something we can actually do to fix it. Like, that's great. Like that, more psychological research needs to be like that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I mean, but with any study, right, there's like limitations. So there might be a few with this, right? So they're using what's called, if you've never heard of it before, right? So it's Amazon Mechanical Turk, and it's a way to recruit participants, right? So you may not even know this, but there's this like platform essentially where you can like earn money to, conduct, do studies, right? And provide responses, survey responses, do take part in tasks. So they use that for, I think it was all 3 samples, right? Don't know if I have the details right. But the problem, right, with Mechanical Turk, I mean, there are some problems, but one of them is that it may not be what's called like generalizable, right? Meaning the people that are in the sample, they may not be like representative of like the entire population, right? The characteristics, demographics, things like that. So that is one of the shortcomings of this research, even though it's, trying to like look at intervention, stuff and like have those implications, that is something that we have to consider. And especially because they're looking at conservatism versus like liberals, right? So to make a claim about something like that, it's
you would need half conservatives and half liberals at least.
Yeah, which we don't really think I don't think they actually have that, right, with this research.
Yeah, I don't think we actually know. Did they report the demographics?
I don't think so. But again, it's a
Right.
short paper, so maybe they have that reported elsewhere and we just don't see it in the write-up.
But they do mention that, so they cite other papers showing that like MTurk participants are still, representative of the US. But, this is this has been a lot debated in psychological research. So
Right. Yeah, no, it definitely has. And I mean, honestly, I would say it probably isn't representative. Like anytime you have just people that are on the internet, like taking surveys all day, like that, it's a tough stretch to say, like, oh, these are actually, this is just the United States, right? There's plenty of people who've never even heard of mTurk. Let alone actually use it. I mean, I can't use it. I wouldn't want to sit doing surveys all day. I guess more power to the people that are doing it. But right, so we don't necessarily know if it's been 50-50 liberals and conservatives in this paper. And actually, a lot of the research that has been done so far would probably say it's not necessarily that. It's probably leaning a little bit more liberal than anything else. It's possible that with COVID and with all the quarantine that has happened, that some of those numbers have actually reduced, and so that some of that bias has been reduced, so that it is a little bit more equal. But still, overall, it does seem to be leaning toward liberal. That, and also like with ethnicity, with education, all of those kinds of things also get skewed with this. So yeah, I think it's a great point that you're raising, Liz. That who knows, basically. I think on this, it's we can take the findings with a grain of salt, I think.
Yeah, it's not to discount them entirely. I mean, but like you definitely have to like have like a little question like mark there at the end. Like, is this actually real world like truth? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it worked, right? Like whatever they did, it did work. Whoever these people are, we don't know who we can generalize to, but it did work.
Exactly.
And also in terms of the generalizability, this is also a very difficult word to pronounce.
That's why I didn't want to say it at first. I was like, can I actually say this word? I don't know.
So exactly. So one thing that Alex brought up quite earlier on in this podcast was the distinction between measuring intentions versus behavior. So obviously, like the authors say, social distancing has been a very important part of preventing COVID. I mean, the spread of COVID. But then, you know, the authors really end with measuring just intentions. So we really don't know if people will actually go out there after the intervention and start, you know, actually practicing social distancing, right? So I would say, you know, if we were to find some weaknesses of the paper, that could be one.
If we were to, as we continue doing so.
Well, I started. I'm the bad guy, so.
But no, again, such a great point, right? I mean, not that I said it, but that Annie said it.
The responsibility is all mine.
The fact that it is much more this intention sort of thing, that like, do you support the idea of social distancing? Like, there's no one-to-one relationship between just like thinking in your head, like, hey, this is a good idea, versus like, I'm actually going to behave in this way now. That would be great if that was the case, right? Like, psychology would be so much easier, and we could change a lot of behaviors that way, right? But it's not. It is a good predictor, I would say, of behaviors, but there's plenty of different ways that could go. They could just like simply think it's a good idea, but like it's too much energy for themselves, or like, oh, they can like trust the people around them so they don't have to socially distance, or like whatever, right? Like there's a lot of just real world like things that happen.
Exactly. I mean, I always want to wake up early, but I never do it. So, you know, that's really a good demonstration of the distinction between intention and behavior. Sorry,
Yes,
I didn't mean to make a joke out of this.
That's a good example though of like our behavior, that we may want to do something, but like to actually do it, it's difficult.
Yes. There's a very big disconnect sometimes.
Yes, right. So I guess I am curious then, what do we think would actually help in getting this behavior kind of aspect? Because like that's what the end goal really is, right? It's not just to like say like, oh, like as a society we agree that this is good, but we're not going to listen. What else could work? So I think one thing that I think about is like, who is the actual source that is saying we're trying to correct for this misinformation? If we like look at like maybe major media sources, and maybe people like listen to CNN or MSNBC or Fox or whatever it is, right? If these news anchors were to say, like, oh, like we actually have this misperception of how COVID is spread. It's actually like this. And then like have people like it just on national live television, just like go through like, oh, it's not like adding 5 people a week. It actually doubles every few days. And having that like thought process like worked out for people, that does seem to help. And I think it would help even more if it's someone that like you think of as credible, if it's someone that like has that popularity, if it's someone that like you, I mean, you go to for information, you literally go to the to news to get information.
It might be TikTok these days. It might not actually be news outlets, but like TikTok and like social media. So that's a consideration too.
Right. Yes.
So
But what did you think? Like maybe not news anchors. Maybe they're a little outdated. But what do you think of this?
So one thing I thought about was the authors also mentioned about like personal relevance. So like sometimes, like I think, sometimes like the reason many people actually think that like they think that they know that COVID is a serious issue, but sometimes they think that it's not really going to affect me. Like I'm healthy, I'm fine, I always stay at home. So I think there's sometimes the reason people don't engage in preventive behaviors enough is because they underestimate the likelihood that COVID will affect themselves, right? So when, like you said, when, popular media or trustworthy media is actually communicating the exponential bias, they can also explain, because of this exponential bias, COVID that's happening, farther away from where you live can really quickly reach where you live, right? Your own social network. So maybe that could increase the personal relevance of this whole exponential bias and make people be more motivated to correct for their misperceptions. One thought there.
No,
Yes.
that's really cool. Liz, sorry, were you gonna say something?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say like it could be like the number of times like your exposure to the information, right? So not just like hearing from a credible source, but like repeatedly, right? If you hear the message, you might be like, okay, well maybe this is actually relevant now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, persuasion is nothing but a bunch of trickery. But
really, though, I mean,
yeah. So both of you are bringing up points that I hadn't really like put these pieces together before. And it could be it's just like one of the like attributing factors. I don't think it's like the reason, but some of the major spread like that happened in like New York, right? That happened in California, like these Texas, like these huge states had some of the biggest spread at first. But then now we're seeing, I mean, we're seeing in the United States, everywhere it's kind of increasing, but I would say the major places that it's increasing are probably actually these like smaller states that, I mean, maybe the personal relevance just wasn't there, right? Like the repeated nature of these news stories of like how much it's actually spreading, how bad this is getting, how many deaths there are, how many hospitalizations there are. Like if you live in a bigger state, like that was like just constantly being thrown in your face, but not so much in other places, I don't think. Although I think now the tables have like kind of like turned there in the sense of there are local newspapers that are like publishing often, and like I hadn't heard about this until I like saw like, oh, like in Kansas, like their local newspapers are just like saying all these things. I'm like, whoa, that's like really cool. Like I'm sorry that it's happening, but like I'm glad that that's being like said.
Communication, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
I'm even
yeah,
just thinking like rural Pennsylvania, like Amish,
right.
like country. Like I wonder if now they're finally getting, not to bash on any places, you know.
No, it's just that wasn't the priority, right? Like, and it didn't need to be. But like now that we know how much this is spreading and how quickly it spreads, like maybe we can have a little bit more like alert, I guess, with knowing this information. So yeah, great points. Thank you for bringing that up. Other things that you think might be improved here? What do you think?
Yeah, so in terms of like methodological sense, so in addition to social distancing, I'm pretty aware that mask wearing was also a very controversial issue at the beginning of the pandemic. So I would have been, very much curious about how this all pans out for mask wearing as well. Like, is exponential bias at least partially responsible for why, people don't underestimate the importance of wearing masks, or because mask wearing was so like controversial and people think that is, hurting their personal freedom. Maybe knowing about exponential bias doesn't really help at all because people aren't just motivated. Yeah, so that is something that I was curious about, but the paper didn't really, test mask wearing, nor, discussed it. So, yeah.
It sounds like that would have been like more relevant potentially, right, for conservatives, right? Given that a lot of the research finds that conservatives like were less likely to wear a mask, right, and try to like spread the downplay the spread of the virus. So maybe that could have been like part of the intervention aspect of it.
I thought you were just saying that they were actually trying to spread the virus.
I think I probably misspoke. It probably came out that way. Whoops.
Yes, that's not the case. So.
No.
Cool. Okay, so I think mask wearing is definitely, it's different, right? It's, I would say, pretty different than social distancing actually, because it was so politicized.
Yes.
Like it showed like, oh, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? Like if you're wearing a mask, you must be one of these things or and not the other, right? And like it's so visible too, right? Like as opposed to social distancing, which is like a little bit more like ambiguous. Like I mean, unless you're like really doing it properly, like it looks kind of funky. But like mask wearing is just so much more in your face as far as like just the visibility of it. So I wonder how effective something like this would be if we were trying to like really improve this kind of behavior. Is there going to be like that much more like pushback against trying to correct like this? Like if you're trying to also make the point of like, hey, you should wear your mask because of this bias that we have as humans, like, oh, let me explain it to you, blah blah blah. And like we can maybe correct that misinformation, but like does it actually make that leap to like something that's so like emotionally like charged, you know?
And it's behavior. It goes back to behavior, right? Like you may think, even with the knowledge, like, oh, this is something I maybe should do, right? But then maybe it's very complex, right? You may have views of like, oh, well, that's taking away from my freedom, right? You're telling me what I have to do. And some people are not on board with that. So.
Yeah, and also wearing mask was like a political statement, like at, very earlier on. So it's like, maybe I know wearing mask is important, but then like, nobody else around me wears mask, and they're actually trying to convey a message by not wearing a mask. So should I do it? So there could be other factors, like Liz said, that that disrupts the link between what people think and what people actually do.
This is all making me think like that, and there's definitely downsides to like doing this like pretty great thing to like make sure that people are just more knowledgeable, but like if you start to like alienate some people just because of things like politics or even like health literacy, like sort of like things, right? Like just literally knowing about like how health works. Like if you start to educate some people and leave others out, like I don't know if that's gonna that information is going to spread in the way that we want it to, and like it might actually have people like really start to push back, like, hey, like I thought I knew you, like I've known you for so many years, but now you're like, oh, so fancy, and like you know science, like you think you're better than me, like things like that.
Yeah.
Now
so that's like, linked to mistrust in science too.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, the reactants, the mistrust in science, like all of those, they become like even more polarized than they already are. Like unless we do it right. And I mean, what does that mean? I don't know. If we knew,
it's an
we would
open
be doing
question.
It, yeah.
I mean, if the paper were, really wanted to try to answer that, they could have tested whether their intervention is more effective for conservatives versus liberals. But given that the paper don't really test that, and So, it kind of leaves an open question of like, what about reactants, particularly among conservatives? And, is this going to be effective for different political orientations? So there are still definitely some open questions.
That's science
Yeah.
for you, though. Everything's an open question. What is the answer?
There is never a concrete, definite answer, like in anything.
That's the fun of it, though. It's good.
Yeah.
So I mean that it would be so great to know for what groups does this work the best, and then like continue to work from there, like to know that like, oh, does it actually work for everyone, or is it like, did it really work for like maybe just liberals and it didn't work at all for conservatives? Like this paper just doesn't speak on that, and I mean it very well could have been the case that that actually happened, but the average, like it looked like that, like everyone was doing a little bit better. So tough. And I like my mind just completely goes into like, oh, how do we fix for that? And that's all these methodological points that I'm not going to start making right here. So maybe we should, I don't know, unless there's like any other big points that you want to talk about. I think we might be good for like a final thought here.
Yes, so maybe we can leave with a positive note, despite all of the criticisms that we had in this podcast. Criticisms are just, natural thing that we do as scientists. So, that's that. But at least, the paper, talks about exponential bias, which is very natural, right? Like, why do people even need to care about health statistics? Like they're just so busy in their everyday lives, and especially with COVID, the job losses of life and other things that's going on, it's okay, right, to misperceive. But then the good point and the positive note of this paper is that, these things can be corrected very easily, right? I think their interventions involved, just one or two sentences about what exponential bias is and like how coronavirus actually grows. And that was enough to correct people's misperceptions. So, this is not the end of the world. People are very, people do have the ability to correct for their misperceptions and also their, support for different COVID prevention measures. So, it was really knowing what they found in the paper, I would say.
Yes, yeah, no, those are all the perfect points, I think. That this was a super simple intervention. Like it could only like get better, I think, from here. But we already saw some positive effects. So that's like very cool. I almost want to say like, oh, your homework assignment now is like tell 5 people like about this exponential bias.
Now right? So why don't you go out and tell other people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The world will be a better place. I mean, that's what we need to do.
The world will be a better place faster than we think, right? Like that's also exponential growth. Is that if everyone keeps telling 5 people, then it'll take over. This is a horrible joke. I'm not even going to finish it, actually.
I think it's a great joke. That's your homework. Go out and spread the news.
We can do exponential bias without COVID. I mean, dang it, I said that kind of wrong.
I actually love that because that's, one of my paper, like pro-social behavior is contagious.
Right.
And it's exponential. I mean, we can talk about this later, but I really love your point.
Awesome. So then I think that we'll wrap up this paper. What's coming up? I was going to say we're going to talk more about prosociality, but we're not going to talk more. Well, I mean, in some ways.
At some point.
Right.
Eventually.
Yes, definitely. Eventually, we'll return to prosociality. But next week, we want to continue with more health-related topics. I think we all have some knowledge on health, and I think it's also like it's something that affects so many people that like we want to keep talking about that important topic. So we'll be talking about breast cancer patients and how well they're coping with breast cancer with their partners, and what are some of the factors that go into a good, like well-adjusted like couple. How do you help your partner? Sorry, my mic almost fell.
You got so excited.
Yes, yeah. Yes. I got. You can tell, like I'm more and more excited the more my hands keep moving around.
I have that habit too, constantly.
Cool. So then we have that going. And I think, as always, I will just mention that we're doing a lot of things. We have videos, we have visual abstracts, we have write ups, we have guides up now.
It's exponential growth, people. Exponential growth.
We have a lot of things in a lot of places, such as our website, roomforresearch.com, or also social media. You can find us at Room for Research. That is on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and TikTok.
Everywhere.
Yes.
Wait, why don't we
And
have Snapchat? Oh,
we do have Snapchat.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So it's
we just,
everywhere.
we
Okay.
haven't used it yet, but maybe if people could give us a reason to use Snapchat, we will use it. If it helps. Anything we can do, let us know. And until next week, thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye for now.
With the sun breeze.